and I am the Associate Marketing Manager for Microsoft out of our Seattle office. This webcast series, as long as a lot of our marketing activities, is done by the wonderful Erin Quinn, who is out of New Jersey. And I will now hand it over to Neil Elcott, our Director and Senior Solutions Architect, who can speak a bit more about his background as well as show you how to use the newest features in Project Online. Neil?
Thanks, Victoria. Again, my name's Neil Elcott. I know some of you guys who are customers on the webcast, and hopefully some of you guys are new. But again, I'm Director of R&D at Microsoft Vibrant Fusion. I'm also a Senior Solutions Architect. I've been working with the Microsoft Project family of products for probably 12 to 15 years now, hence a lot of the gray hair that I have. And in particular, I've spent quite a bit of time working with Project Server and nowadays Project Online. I'm also a member of the Microsoft Project Advisory Council, so I'm one of 25 members worldwide who work directly with the product team to give them feedback on what they're developing, what customers are asking for, what are some of the pain points that customers have, and what are some of the wish list items that customers have. So I'm a direct conduit back to the product team. Real quick about Vibrant Fusion, for those of you that aren't familiar about us, we really focus on the Project Server, Project Online space. So we really focus on implementation, migration, deployment of those tools for customers. We're well known for our pre-configured solution, which is Quick PMO, which is a way for you to get up and running in Project Server or Project Online very quickly. And we have a number of other add-on products. Again, depending on what we're hearing from customers, if we see a particular need, our development team will create additional solutions to help meet that need for customers. We also provide support for Project Server and Project Online. So if you want us to, maybe as an extension of your help desk, we can provide that level of support with our in-depth knowledge. Our support teams have access to our architects, our developers, our report writers. So depending on the issue you may be experiencing, they can escalate it to the right person within our organization. Back in April, we were acquired by Microsoft. So Microsoft is a global Microsoft partner, and we're now operating under their North America umbrella. For Vibrant Fusion, it really helps us increase the response time and delivery time. They've added a number of different resources and capabilities to our team, and in particular, they also offer services around staffing, managed services, and they're also a red carpet program member for Microsoft's Power BI solution. And as you can imagine, Power BI and Project Online go together like a hand in glove, so it really works out great. All right, so what we're going to cover today is we're going to look at some of the new features that Microsoft has rolled out to Project Online and Project Server 2016. So we're going to focus on 4 different areas. Resource engagements. We're also going to take a look at the multiple timeline capability. We're going to take a look at alerts and reminders. And then we're also going to look at some of the out-of-the-box reports that they've added to the tools. So I have a couple slides to just talk overall about resource engagements before I demo them. For those of you that use Project Server and Project Online today, as you know, there is an enterprise resource pool that's a key component within the tool itself. And in the resource pool is where you have all your employees, your contractors. You could also have materials and cost resources. But it's basically where the project managers select individuals to do the work on their projects. For some organizations, and it varies, we see this in different types of organizations, but you may need a more stringent resource management, resource request process. And originally, the resource pool didn't really provide that. Any PM could go in, and depending on their permissions, they could select any resource out of the resource pool to then turn around and do work. With resource engagements, what Microsoft has done is they've added capabilities in order for you to create a more robust resource management process and allow the tool to help you with some of the requesting and approval, rejection steps in your process. So what I have on this slide here is just a rough overview of the way the tool works with the resource engagements, and I'm going to go ahead and demo it. So the first thing is, in the tool itself, you would define who your resource managers are, and then it would be up to them to decide who needs to have their work approved. So in other words, if I'm managing a group of developers, I can set it up so that my developers cannot be requested directly from the project manager. They have to submit a resource engagement request, and then it goes back to me as the resource manager to either approve or reject it. Once I decide who requires that approval, whenever the project manager requests one of those resources, in Project Pro 2016 is the capability for the project manager to develop a resource plan where they would create these engagement requests. Once they create and submit an engagement request, within the system, the engagement request would go to me as the resource manager for the approval. Now, periodically, the resource manager would review and approve or reject those resource requests. That happens in Project Web App, or PWA. So as a resource manager, I would periodically log into PWA, take a look at the engagement requests that have come in, and then I can either tailor the engagement request and approve it, or I could just outright reject it. Once those three steps take place, then you're kind of back to what you'd normally do in Project Server, Project Online. The PM assigns the resource to a different task, and then the resource begins work on the project itself. Now, some things to note as I get in and start demoing this. One big change you have with this is your resource plans are no longer a function of PWA. They're now part of Project Web App. The resource engagements are only available if you're using Microsoft Project Pro 2016 and Project Online or Project Server 2016. Finally, the resource engagement process itself is kind of a soft process. It doesn't stop the PM from assigning a resource without the approval. So in other words, they can still go ahead and do things outside the approval process. They will get warnings and little indicators occasionally, but they won't be prevented from assigning someone to an actual task. So think of it as a way to help manage that overall process, help you communicate those approval processes, but it's not going to lock the entire system down where nobody can request a resource whatsoever. All right. So let's get into the demo itself. So,
hey Neil, just before you go into the demo, can you make sure that you're recording the demo?
It is recording.
Oh, okay, great. I was just double checking. Thank you.
No problem. So what we're looking at right now is Project Online. So it's PWA. This is one of the environments with our Quick PMO solution installed on it. I'm going to use that for the demo, but we're not looking at a Quick PMO specific function. This is an out-of-the-box Project Server, Project Online function. So the first step of that process is the resource manager would go into the resource pool, and any of the resources that he's responsible for, he can then specify whether or not they require a resource request. So by default, no resources have resource requests turned on for them. It's not required. But if you do, and I'm going to go ahead and I have a few resources selected here. If I go in and edit one of these, you'll see this option here where the resource requires approval for all project assignments. So again, by default, that'll be turned off. But if you do go ahead and you do turn that on, for this particular resource, which in this case is Aaron, it would require that they get a resource request has to be submitted, has to be approved before they can be assigned work on the project. Again, keep in mind it's kind of a soft approval. As I mentioned, the PM can still go ahead and assign work, but they'll get warnings and little indicators in their project schedule to say they don't have the permission or the approval to assign this resource work on their project. So they would go through, I'm not going to go through all these guys, but they would go through and set that option for each of their resources, save it, and then at that point, it's been activated for that particular resource. Now, what actually happens, so if we go over onto the project manager side, if I go into Project Pro, in Project Pro, if I have a basic project schedule created here, I can go in and I can add resources. And this is the way you do it today. You go into the resource pool using the Build a Team dialog box. You pick the resources that you want to use. I'm just going to go into here, grab several resources. Hit OK. Now where it changes up a little bit, so a couple of little gotchas here. Make sure you save your project for the first time. So it needs to be saved up into PWA in order for it to work. So you have to have a connection to PWA. And next, if I change my view from the Gantt chart, you'll see this resource plan option now. So if I go into the resource plan, here you'll see the different resources that I've added. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see how many units, could be hours, could be days, are you assigning to each of these resources, and what's the time frame. But up here on the ribbon, you'll see this engagements option. So when I go into here, I can add an engagement, and it'll default to whichever resource you currently have selected. So this is a little resource request form. So I can go into here, I could say, need Aaron to do some work, and I'm going to need him to start on, say, August 22nd. I think he's going to finish the end of September. And I need him 100% of his time. If you think you need him for less than that, you can just go in and change the percent. You can also put in hours. So if you switch to work, you can say how many hours do you need over that time frame. General rule of thumb here is you want to be at a high level. You don't want to have to put in resource requests for every single task that the person might be working on, but in general, what is it that you need them to do? And you can also put in comments if you want to have a conversation with the resource manager through the system. So when I add an engagement, you can see here it pops into the system. Over here, it's telling me what my proposed match units are. If I go and I add some more, for example, if I add one for Jason, I need him 100% of the time, and so forth and so on. So you can go through here, create all your different resource engagements, get an idea of how much time you want to allocate to each resource. A couple things to note. One is pay attention to the engagement status here. As you can see, we're still in draft mode. What that simply means is I haven't submitted it for approval yet with the resource manager. So another gotcha, I mentioned make sure you save and you have your project schedule connected to PWA. You'll notice here if I want to submit these, the submit button's grayed out. And that's because I haven't published this project yet. So if I go in, I publish it. Once it's done publishing, you'll see the submit button becomes active. There we go. So when I go to submit, I could either submit all the engagements, or if I just wanted to submit one of these, I could select that one row and then hit submit selected engagements. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and submit them all. Notice the engagement status is now switched to proposed. So from the PM's perspective, I know who I want to work on my project. I put in a request for the time frame that I need them and how much time do I need of them. At this point, it goes back to the resource manager to analyze that request and then either approve or reject it. So if I go back to PWA, in the Resource Center, up on the ribbon, you'll see this Resource Request button. And when I go into here, you'll get this table which will show you all the different resource requests that have come in for you, and then all the engagements that are coming from different projects. So if we go into here and we look, we can see there's actually several projects that are requesting Aaron. So we have 3 different projects going on, and then over here I get an idea of how many hours are they requesting, and then what's the current status of that engagement. Now, if you are an organization where you have the resource breakdown structure set up in your environment, the resource managers will only see the resource request for the people that report to them. If you don't have that set up, then the resource manager sees all the resource requests across the board. So the way this works is I can go into here and I could do a couple different things. One is I could look at how much time are they requesting for Aaron, in this case, on this project. And if I look at some of this, I can see he's being over allocated. He's working 60 hours a week, or it's proposed he'll work 60 hours a week for 3 weeks, an 80-hour a week, and then it kind of tails off. If I want to adjust this to get him down to a 40-hour work week, I can go in and I could change what I'm willing to commit that particular resource to. And by doing that, I can spread out some of the work. Now, again, you may have to have a conversation with the PM to make sure that'll work with their schedule, or you could also go in and you can add engagements here as the resource manager. So maybe I can't give Aaron to that particular project full time, but I could go into here and say, you know what, you can also have Josh, whatever project that was, I think it was this one. Put in the time frame. And I could say I can give you 50% of Josh's time. So now you see I added an engagement. So those resource requests, those engagements can be created either by the project manager or the resource manager. For whoever's the manager of this project, when they go in and check this, they will see the engagement has been added for Josh to work on their project. And they can go in, select whichever ones they want to go ahead and approve, and then up here you have your accept or reject options. They accept it, the PM at that point can start assigning work to them. They won't get any warning indicators or anything within Project Pro. And at that point, it operates just like Project Server, Project Online does today. Another thing that you can do is you could also do some analysis on this. So if I click on capacity planning here, let me go to this tab. If I go into capacity planning, you have a number of different views. Now, some of you guys will recognize these if you've used this capability in the past, but they have updated them recently for Project Online and Project Server 2016. So the first thing is you have this heat map, which will show you what's the workload for this particular group of resources. And then you have the ability to set some thresholds of where it'll be flagged as either over-allocated or under-allocated. And I can change the time scale, you know, depending on What level of detail do I want to look at? So here's a better view of that particular heat map. And that's the capacity and engagements heat map view. Now the other views, which have been in Project Server, but they've updated them, is the resource utilization view. So you'll notice you have some of this, better web reporting technology. It's much more interactive than it used to be. And all the out-of-the-box reports and views have been updated for that. All right. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to accept these. I can put in a comment if I want. And if I accepted it, again, the PM can then start assigning work to that particular resource. If I put in a new engagement like I did down here with Josh, basically that person will be added to the project team. And since it's been approved at that point, the PM can then go and assign work to Josh as well. All right. Let's go back to our slides real quick. So that's the resource engagements. The next new feature we want to take a look at is multiple timelines. So timelines, they were introduced in Project 2010. And what they allow you to do is create a linear view of your project schedule, which executives tend to love, where you can promote particular phases or major activities, major milestones, and get a linear view of what's going to happen with the project. And as you update your schedule, the timeline automatically updates, so forth and so on. With the multiple timeline capability, the reason they came out with this is because when you have a single timeline, if you have a large project with lots of activities going on, that timeline can, get pretty unwieldy. With the multiple timelines, it allows you to actually break out different phases or different work streams in a project and let it have its own timeline so that you can then put in as much detail as you want, but it doesn't get all cluttered. It looks a lot better. The timelines can be created and edited in both Project Pro 2016 and PWA. Obviously, Project Pro 2016 is a little bit more user-friendly for the editing side of things, but you can do most of the functionality in PWA as well. One key point, too, for those of you that use your Project SharePoint sites, if you have your task sync enabled, it will synchronize the timeline down into the SharePoint site as well. So anybody using your project site on the SharePoint side will then be able to get updates on the timeline and see the latest timeline versions. So let me go into here. I'm going to go back into Project Pro. I'm going to open up an existing project.